This is my audience on Zoom. I have my Aunt Laura, my cousin Emilia, my friend Sam, and my friend Gordon. In person, I have my mom's boyfriend Joe and my mom, who will be taking over as camera person. In 1990, a man named Jesse Taffert was executed in the state of Florida. His co-defendant was later exonerated upon the realization that neither she nor Jesse had actually committed the crime, but it was too late for Jesse. He was already dead. This story, presented by Michael Radelet and Hugo Adam-Bedeau from Duke University's journal, Law and Contemporary Problems, illustrates only one of the ways that the death penalty is ineffective. According to the Death Penalty Information Center website, 28 states still practice the death penalty today. My interest in the death penalty began in middle school when I developed an interest in true crime. John Wayne Gacy, Ted Bundy, Albert Fish, these men were all executed for their crimes, but I began to wonder, were they really punished? Instead of suffering in prison, they simply ceased to exist. This didn't seem right to me, so I decided to do some further research into the effectiveness of the death penalty and found out that it isn't actually all that effective. Today, we'll explore 3 reasons that the death penalty should be abolished in the United States. The fact that it doesn't actually deter crime, the enormous expenses associated with it, and the potential of executing the innocent. We'll begin by talking about whether or not the death penalty is actually effective in deterring crime. According to an article by Jeremy Collins, originally published in the Colorado Citizen, homicide rates in the United States and Canada have moved virtually in lockstep since 1972, the year that Canada abolished the death penalty. This itself is significant evidence that violent crime rates aren't affected by the potential of receiving the death penalty. In addition, according to Max Ehrenfreud from the Washington Post, there's evidence that criminals don't actually think about the punishment they might receive. He says, in fact, research suggests that criminals are mainly concerned about whether or not they'll be caught, not what might happen to them afterwards. When we hear the term crime of passion, we think about murders that happened in the heat of the moment and were emotionally charged. There's often no forethought about the crime itself, never mind the punishment that might ensue afterwards. According to Cornell Law School's Legal Information Institute, crimes of passion are often given lesser sentences than their premeditated counterparts because of this. But how can we say that the death penalty deters crime when there's an entire subsection of homicides that's virtually unaffected by the potential of receiving the death penalty? Next, we'll discuss the expenses associated with the death penalty. According to Kimberly Amato from thebalance.com, death penalty trials are often more costly than those aiming for a sentence of life in prison. There's a preliminary hearing to decide whether or not there needs to be a grand jury, and then there's another hearing before the trial can even begin, and once it does, it's often longer, thus making it more expensive. In fact, in the state of Kansas, the average non-capital punishment trial averages around $100,000, while the average death penalty trial averages $400,000. Ms. Amato adds that not only is the trials expensive, but holding a prisoner in death row is costly as well. She says between 2008 and 2017, Louisiana spent $15.6 million each year to maintain their capital punishment system. This does not include prosecution costs, court costs for cases that never went to trial, or the cost of the state Supreme Court review. During this time, the state executed 1 person. She adds that not only are holding death row inmates in death row expensive itself, but because they're on average older than those in the general population, there's age-related illnesses that lead to higher healthcare costs. Ms. Amato adds that not only are there age-related healthcare costs, but mental health-related costs as well. Not only do prisoners not have life outside of prison to look forward to, but they're isolated. This can lead to significant mental health issues such as depression, which the state ends up having to pay for the cost of. This graph that I created from data from the Amnesty International website illustrates the average cost of a death penalty case through execution versus a life imprisonment case through the end of incarceration. You can see that the average death penalty case averages around $1.26 million per person, while the average life imprisonment case is $740,000. Next, we'll discuss the potential of putting an innocent person on death row or potentially even executing them. According to Edward Kennedy and the other authors of a research article titled "Innocent People Are Given Death Sentences," while death sentences only represent around 0.10% of sentences, they represent 12% of exonerations. In fact, according to Noel Marino from PLOS Medicine, between 1973 and 2004, there were 118 prisoners sentenced to death that were later exonerated. She says that part of the entire issue relating to the death penalty may be racially charged because over half of those exonerated during that time were African American. The story we talked about earlier about Jesse Taffero is only one instance of a person being executed in the United States who was innocent. According to an article in The Atlantic by Andrew Cohen, another incident occurred in 1989 when a man named Carlos DeLuca was executed for the 1983 murder of Wanda Lopez. It was discovered only after his execution that the murder was actually committed by a man named Carlos Hernandez. With all this information about the ineffectiveness of the death penalty, how is it still in practice in 28 different states? The death penalty has been around in some form or another since the beginning of humanity. But does that really mean that it should still be in practice? Today we explored 3 reasons that the death penalty should be abolished in the United States: its ineffectiveness in deterring crime, the costliness associated with it, and the potential of putting an innocent person on death row or even executing them. When confronted with these facts, it's clear that the death penalty isn't justifiable. We as citizens can aid in the fight against capital punishment, so I urge you all to do some more research about the subject. Some great resources for this are the American Civil Liberties Union website and the National Coalition to Abolish the Death Penalty website. We'll also be sending everyone in the audience a link to a petition on actionnetwork.com urging the federal government to abolish the death penalty. As Winston Churchill once said, "I never worry about action, only inaction."